Welcome to the second part of this episode of BeyondTech with our guest, Dr. Professor Derek Woodgate. In case you missed the first part of the discussion, you can find it by clicking the link in the top right corner. The different discussion points are all timestamped throughout the episode, so you can freely move around as you see fit. We discussed the current developments and state of technological advancement as it stands in quite a bit of detail. But now I'd like to go further ahead. What I would love to do is for everyone to basically put on their futurist hats, if you will. You mentioned that you often look 15 to 20 years ahead. So when we're talking about the currently emerging technologies, and as you said, even the ones that are no longer emerging, they're past that stage, the growing stage. What are the technologies that you are most intrigued by, that you think have the most potential for growth or for making an impact in the not so distant future?
From an interest perspective, I mentioned earlier that, I believe in these parallel developments. So I'm never really looking at a technology simply, I need to understand it, but simply from the technological perspective, I'm looking at what it does for society. I suppose that's my role. And I think within that, some of the areas I'm particular, and let's talk about areas first because I help understand the technologies. Without any question, human augmentation is a big one for me. So yes, I'm very interested in that in every area, whether it's looking at from cyborgs or transhumans or posthumans, or even the augmented learner. What does that mean from the perspective of assisted technologies or assisted environments or BCI, particularly brain implants and all those areas. So I've seen a lot. I look at a lot of things around multi-agent machine cognition and things like that, because I can't see the augmented learner without these areas of operation, these areas of augmentation. I look at what are augmented and embodied agents and all the work that's happening in that area. And the way it's springing up is adaptable, autonomous, hybridized, and situational and social and so on and so forth. And what they've meant, one of the aspects of my interest in this is how does it actually shift our concepts and contexts? So what's the reconceptualization and recontextualization of our world? So when I look at something like social, I'm not just thinking of it from the social network perspective, some social communication or what it happens to be. I'm looking at what that actually does. So how does that shift our everyday lives, how we interrelate with one another, what communication systems do we use, how does that impact our ability to work, how does that impact our ability to gain knowledge and information, and so on and so forth. And you take something like social, which is a very good platform in that sense, and you begin to understand that our dating, right, has shifted. I'm one personally, but most people I know, accumulation of news, our ability to communicate directly with famous people. Obviously, I do a lot with gaming and gamification, some of these areas. So when I analyze these types of things, I begin to understand what is a transactional space, not just from whether that's a financial transactional space. What does it mean in friendship? What does it mean in communication? What does it mean in identity? Which is a massive area going forward. Multiple identities, how we see ourselves, you think about the metaverse, how we project ourselves through avatars. Do they shift this type of areas? So to me, the technology per se is interesting. So when I talk about collective open intelligence, it's a massive area because I believe it is, but it's more about what we do with the intelligence and how we apply it and where we apply it and who are the beneficiaries of it and how it improves our well-being, societal well-being, then actually I want to know the rules around it because they will have an impact on the benefits. And otherwise, I need to know the tipping points. What are the key things? What are the must-haves to drive this? But some of the things I'm looking at around, I'm talking about transdisciplinarity, but that brings with it a whole load of areas, and that's maybe part of this whole thing. Neurorobotics, things that we don't normally talk about. Bioengineering, what's happening there? Massive things, which again, AI is critical to that. It's bioengineering. Molecular nanotech, things like mind to mind, life extension, brain implants. All these areas are critical to what I first mentioned, which was human augmentation. And these will all have an impact on identity. When we talk about re-engineering the human and re-genetic engineering the human, designer babies and stuff like that, how does that impact basic Jungian thought on our structures? And these are all critical aspects. I don't think we can see any of this in a singular point. It's all integrated. So I'm always looking at these overarching themes, I suppose you call them. I mentioned smart city, an easy one, but there are things like urban development, things like spatial intelligence, information or urbanism and stuff like that, that have a whole new role to play in our lives that we need to understand, because that's where the changes occur. The technologies are a driver for that. But when I can adopt a designer baby, that shifts the family is. So it's those changes, those I call them reconceptualization or recontextualization of the way we live. These are the things that matter to me, because ultimately, whether we like it or not, over a period of time, we maybe not notice a lot of the time, but those things are the things that happen. So it's easy to talk about something like how banking's changed, how cyber currencies and all the structures around that and what that meant, and how it's operating or not operating, how it's working, how we use them, where it came from Second Life, and how Bitcoin grew out of all that. And yeah, we can do all that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what has that done for the way we transact? Is it shifted transaction more toward bartering? So that's the type of thing that I want to see, because if I talk about emerging issues, they're the things that I want to follow. And all these technologies somehow fit into that or drive those new ways of thinking about it or new structures. That's my way of looking at it. Obviously, at the end of the day, people are developing emotional machines, which I think is phenomenal, by the way. And yeah, I think that would change our lives and the way we think about machines and the way we deal with mutual intelligibility, our ability to understand one another, communicate, our ability to co-produce, co-analyze. So yes, all these things add. I can't not talk about the metaverse, because any question is happening, and it really depends on how it's going to happen and what it means. From the basic level, is it a game or a multiverses of games, which I don't think so, or is it just multiverses of the basic internet in terms of shopping or concerts, live concerts, whatever? I mean, yes, it is. There's a lot more going on beyond all of that, which is critical. And I'll touch on one of them because I know it's an area that is of interest to everybody. And that goes back to the whole thing of social engineering that we talked about, deepfakes. So there's not a better place when you're dealing with identities that aren't necessarily real or otherwise. There's different areas we're seeing at the moment on that side of things, like counterfeiting, total organizations that don't exist, all that stuff's easy. But here I'm talking about identity assassination and murder in the metaverse. Here I'm talking about the ability of generative modeling and generative AI that can reconstruct our verses and our universes across time all the time and lead to completely revamped areas at any given time. And that's sort of interesting. What's happening with evidence tampering? What's happening with literally social engineering that we've seen as totally different types of people? And a lot of it, when we talk about identities, is not necessarily taking on a human avatar as a human identity. It can be any identity. It can be a pigeon for that matter. It doesn't really matter. So these things are complex. And then to understand how we're going to interrelate all these things and play with them. Gamers are going to do better because they're more used to it. Non-gamers are going to be lost for a time, but when they believe they can get their shopping cheaper, I'm sure they go. If you look at the level of ability for simulation, for training, for everything else in 3D environments is unbelievable. And living in a 3D environment, the level of immersion, the level of sense of belongingness, the sense of we call personal ambience, this ability of what we feel in any given situation, our ability to be engaged and interact is going to be incredible. Yeah, I don't know whether by 2025 we're going to be spending 1 hour a day there, 5 hours a day, but you can take any projection you want. I think it will be by 2035 the new internet, because there's no reason why you wouldn't actually transition. It's just different structure, 3D rather than 2D structure. If you look at the 3D games like Roblox, there are hundreds of them. The other day I was playing with some of them, playing in Neon City, playing with avatars that are completely different types of things, thinking about how metapunks and metacops will be in the future and what that's all going to look like. And it's really fun if you've been into Decentraland or Fortnite in Sandbox or any of these. But they're fun to see how far we've got, because it's all in development. There are thousands and thousands of development. And somehow that will be aggregated and something will come from. And will it be exactly as we think? Probably. But that's a technology that affects all of us and is critical. Some of these other technologies I mentioned, I talked about earlier, like cognitive machinery and stuff, we'll all use it, we'll all be using it, we'll all cybernetic organisms, these things are being developed, they're all happening. Molecular machines are happening. They're very low level usage at the moment. We're trying to understand them stuff. They will happen. We won't necessarily always, unless they become a household name like AI or as important, we won't necessarily think about them. They're things that happen in the background. Nano manufacturing will absolutely shift our whole field of manufacturing and create new industries and new products and so on and so forth. No question. That's happening. And so we're seeing this already, some of these robotic processes and automated nano manufacturing processes that are creating things. Quantum's coming in, exocomputing, which is happening this year or should happen this year if Sandia Labs complete their process, is shifting our whole ability of computing massively. I don't need to go into all the details because it's meaning. And I think that these new intelligent tools that we're working with, cognitive machinery and stuff, they are fundamentally shifting how we're going to go in the future. And of course, I have to pay attention to all of them. But some of those are things that happen, just happen. Some people use them for art, and suddenly we think, oh my God, we can do that with it. So read my next book. But yeah, so a lot of important stuff, but put it into context.
You touched on so many different technologies. Some of it I'm not very familiar with, to be very honest. Some of it is obviously very much in development, and some of it I think could go in any given direction. The metaverse is the perfect example of that. I see I've spoken to quite a few people who are very much involved in this field. And it's obviously the 3D-ification of the internet, if you will. Instead of reading it, we would be in a virtual environment to some degree or the other. But I think a lot of other potential side effects would come out of this specifically. So you mentioned deep fakes, you mentioned visual avatars. But if you think about these visual interaction, it's going to be very difficult for us to fully authenticate a person because our models of authentication at the moment are completely different, right? The authentication technology really needs to adapt. Face ID would need to be completely changed. There's already filters that you can use to basically fool Face ID, and so many of the other ones are already defunct. I know that anytime a new type of cryptography or authentication comes about, there will be someone who comes up with a way to go behind it. But I think that's where the metaverse to me becomes problematic, at least where with the current authentication technologies.
Yeah, neuroforensics will have a big impact. And that's why we're seeing things like brain prints. Now, a lot of this is a matter for legislation as well. So can we use certain things? Because this can go in another direction, that we can start to believe that criminal intent, something we've been talking about for many years, is it inbred? Is it social development? Is it predominant in certain groups of people? And so, yeah, we've got to be careful how we deal and work with this type of new authentication processes. Mind reading is one of those.
So that's a perfect segue for us to talk about Neuralink and BCI and how that relates to mind reading. This is one of the technologies I'm personally most fascinated with, essentially the Neuralink project that is co-founded by Elon Musk and aims to develop an implantable brain chip, brain computer interface or brain machine interface that basically allows us to speak to machines and to probably AI to some degree, and then connect us to other digital devices. I suppose sort of like what a wearable would do right now. What are your thoughts on this type of an advancement? How realistic do you think it is? How difficult would it be to create machine interface with our minds and to essentially allow a machine to read our minds?
So mind reading, to me, is very difficult. I'll tell you why it's difficult. I'm very keen on Neuralink succeeding because it's an area I'm exceptionally interested in. I've done a lot of work with wearables and BCI and stuff like that for years. And so Neuralink, the mind to mind, really is about a chip that monitors the moving really of thousands of neurons. And supposedly it will be able to read our mind or allow us to communicate mind to mind. And it has something like, I don't know, 3,000 electrodes that are attached through these, I think they're wires, but they call them flexible threads. Wires. It's a bit like the Matrix. This is the Matrix in real. We are seeing the metaverse in real. So Stevenson and Gibson, Neuromancer, all these things like Ready Player One and Snow Crash and Philip K. Dick and Electric Sheep are all coming to reality. And it's fantastic, isn't it? It's fantastic. Minority Report, which is much later than that, of course, it was in 2000, I think, the movie particularly, is already there. We don't even think about it anymore. It's more or less there. But all the mind-to-mind stuff, there's a problem with that, with BCI in general, and that's that we don't necessarily know sufficiently about our neurological and cognitive systems in real world. So the question is, do you have to create the same, which is a big argument, or can you bypass our true neurological processes? I work with a guy called Rex Jung, who's a neurologist, one of the most famous neurologists, actually. I work with him because he's probably one of the greatest experts in creativity, understanding the neurological aspects of personal creativity, development of creativity. So he worries that, so what the mind of man is about is really collecting those memories and thoughts that are deep inside of us, because that's how we work. Our consciousness is our present. It's what's happening now between you and I. Okay, it has relevance because it's part of what we're doing in the present. It's critical that we understand one another, but much of the feeding of that is our subconscious, because there's a history, we're putting things in. I'm talking to you about Snow Crash and to remember Philip K. Dick. God knows what else. That all comes from our subconscious. And then there's our unconscious. Our unconscious is stuff that we don't really know we know, but we know. They're some of the big things and some of the underlying issues that we all have. But the critical thing is that to be able to get into that subconscious and unconscious, which is part of our memories, big part of our memories, is complicated. And so I think the verdict's out currently on mind to mind, but it'll happen. Okay, the verdict's out because in parallel, we're working with neurology, we're understanding more and more. These things I mentioned earlier, they work in parallel, they drive one another. So I'm very hopeful because forgetting the pure mind to mind, there are some incredible things with BCI that we've done with blindness, we've done with paralysis. Already we're helping people with sensory stimulation that they didn't have. These are wonderful things. So yes, I'm very hopeful that it all comes together and we can take that medical aspect to it to a totally different level.
How do you foresee this coming to be? Is it going to be literally an interface, an auditory or visual interface? So there's basically a voice in your head or a heads up display like Jarvis from Iron Man, something you see, or is it even a thought? Maybe like if you're a visual or auditory person, you would get it in the same way. That's, I think, what I struggle with the most. Not so much how the machine would read our mind, but how we would get the input from the machine, if you will.
Well, the question really is how do we partial this off? Does an implant, the question you're asking, does an implant have the equivalent of a screen? I don't mean a screen, but a visual reading of what we're seeing, an audio reading of what we're seeing. Does AI provide that analysis from a cognitive, emotional perspective at the same time? Which is what you're asking, right? How do we get that? One thing is the production, the source, and the production of that. And the other thing is the distribution. What you're asking me is, how would this be distributed to other parts of our brain that read in microseconds or nanoseconds what we're seeing or hearing? And you're right to ask the question, because what we're seeing predominantly is the source and manufacturing part of it.
Right.
I feel like what we're not yet sufficiently familiar with is the interface. And I don't mean the production interface, the distribution interface. It's a bit like we spend our whole life talking about alternative energy. We never talk about electricity. They're obviously integrated, but they're separate things. And when I think about BCI a lot of the time, which is why I'm really happy with this whole area around stimulated sensory things, is because it's very concrete. I can see, I can hear, I can feel my leg. So what the answer to your question on that one, you know what the actual output is. The output's vision and so on. But when it's about the consciousness or cognitive aspects, seems complicated. But it's only complicated because we don't yet fully understand how an implant looks or works. We talk about it from the operational perspective of how it can be linked into the brain, what it needs to connect to, which part of the cortex, which part of the hippocampus, whatever it has to work with. But we don't talk about, ultimately, at the end of the day, how we're going to receive. And do we receive it through the same, but an augmented version of the same way we receive that data now? But you don't want it juggling with your own consciousness. Is it integrated? It's a little bit of top of head thinking as we go through this. Bear with me, but it is an issue. It's simple with communications. Okay, a hand implant, I'm sure you've seen the Swedish ones. or they are literally hand implant. What are they giving you? The same as your watch wearable could give you, or your phone could give you. There's no cognitive data in that. Now we're shifting to something very different. And then you start getting into whole conversations around the soul, what's acceptable and what isn't acceptable, and what we should be able to even consider in that context or talk about or whatever. These are big stories, they're not that simple to deal with. So, yeah, I agree with you. This is not there yet. But will we get there? Yeah, I think so.
I'm sure you're aware of the theory that intuition is basically pattern recognition that our brains, that our unconscious mind uses to translate the exabytes of information that it gathers that doesn't necessarily go into the conscious mind. And then giving us this sort of gut feeling or intuition that tells us something that our conscious mind can actually accept. But basically, that it's less spiritual, if you will, and it's more just very quick nanosecond response of information that is captured that our conscious mind can't understand because of our latent inhibition. That's a whole topic for a whole different discussion, I'm sure. But I think it makes me think about when you're connecting your mind essentially to a technology like BCI, which is going to potentially have access to your unconscious mind and the data that it gathers, which it can do things to, right? Now, the ideal scenario, of course, is that this is a positive thing. And I think what Neuralink is at least aiming to do is to give you information that you can access in a positive way. But what if this AI can have access to this information on its own, that it can basically fully capture this data in a sense and do whatever it wants with it? Maybe it has negative aims, or maybe it just corrupts this data so you can't access it. And I'm not talking about people hacking it or something, but basically it does something for itself using your brain data, especially if this potentially connects to other AI, right, that has access to this as well. Again, that's a whole different discussion for a whole different time, but I'm just curious your thoughts on this. How should we account for this? Should we think about this as we're creating these AI technologies like GPT-4 and 5 and whatever else? When we're going more towards AGI, should we keep things narrow maybe and not give them that kind of computing power?
This is all the ethical debate on this. I mentioned the black box earlier, I wasn't joking when I said that. And what I meant by it was what should we allow and what shouldn't we allow it to do? But it's funny you talk about this from the intuition perspective, because that's sort of right. I have to determine, even coming to this interview, do you like me? So can I be open with you? Can I trust what you're doing with the information? Can I trust how you interpret the information? Or is this all about destroying my whole persona?
Right.
Like, I mean, exaggerating. But we use it for everything all the time, not maybe as robustly as that. But imagine I get invited to speak on all sorts of stuff, and I'm thinking, who is this? You know, why me? What have I done? But we're always we do it for everything. And I think we feel that's who we are, right? As humans. With time, growing confidence, rightly or wrongly, because clearly at some times we're wrong, whether it's about relationships, all sorts of things. But we are dependent on our, I don't like the word judgment, but in this context, judgment, our ability to consider all the facts and points of view and different perspectives and good and bad and risks and all that in seconds. This isn't in, like, this is easy if I'm writing a strategic plan. If I meet someone in the street or an airport who introduced himself and then said, by the way, it'd be really good to meet you to discuss blah, 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 blah. In that split second, I've got to make a decision. Do I actually receive a WhatsApp message from that guy or block him? Well, I think the AI is perfectly capable of making that decision. But do we want it to? But why would it not have a blocking? Do we want to know everything that someone else thinks? Do we want time for our own thoughts? Do we want to feel, in some ways, is that a good thing? So when you put it into the health context, it's a really good thing. Blind people will see. Wow, that's crazy. But I'm just telling you what a great guy you are and I hate you. Is that a good thing? Our whole cognitive communication, right, is at stake here. It's a reality.
You said it perfectly, I think. We still don't have the full understanding of the sheer computing, the sheer quantum computing capabilities of the human brain. Because what our brains can do, it's not understood at the moment.
We're miles away. We're miles away.
Exactly. It's a developing field. So looking at it objectively, we know that this information is definitely gathered by our brain, the intuition information, if you want to call it. That's a fact. There's probably more information that our brains gathers that we don't actually know about or understand yet, or have theories hypothesizing. But even the amount we know about, if an AI would have access to this information, if it could transcribe this data, if you will, to some degree, that our conscious mind can't, then, so that's maybe more my question. Should we block that part of our brain? Is this something that can even be done, given that we don't know about the brain? Can we really only have this real discussion about BCI once we're past this stage of understanding the human brain, once we fully understood the brain? Is BCI even realistic based on everything I just said?
Yeah, no, I'm certainly in my lifetime. I'm not sure we will, but you're younger, maybe in yours. Um, no, I fully understand. I think it's really complicated. But there may be a breakthrough. That's what I always see with this. It's like the genome. There was a breakthrough. And I think in all of these things, it seems to me, think about the cell, understanding the cell. I was talking with a colleague of mine who'd been working on this for years, actually at Georgia Tech. And he said, well, it's one thing we've never been able, about 3 days later, they had a breakthrough. That changed everything. The genome changed everything. I think within this, there'll be the eureka moment. Once you break that, it's much easier to move it on. I just don't think we found that eureka moment. I think we're still in the hard slog, bit by bit. We do get them, I'm sure. I don't know enough about all of the neurological brain research that's been done. I know that which I need for my own work. I mentioned earlier about this thing about AGI. And I think I said there'd been these 84 cognitive architectures over the past 50 years or whatever, and that there was now projects going on. 60 odd of these were being still used. But there's over 1,000, I don't really think what I said at the time, but there's over 1,000 projects on AGI going on. Something will happen. So I think you have to see it all. I'm a positivist, right? So I always see in that framework, because that's what life's taught me. And then it slows, because suddenly we have an answer to something and then it takes forever to move it to the next level.
That's very true. It's a very non-linear, just as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely.
Makes sense. Okay, so while we wait for that information to come, we can step away from the micro and I think go more towards the macro. A topic you and I have discussed in great detail many times is smart cities. I think it's something that we could literally do a whole episode on, and we should for the future. But I want to bring all of this, in a sense, together with smart cities and smart city technologies, especially as it relates to the future. As things stand, most of what we consider as smart cities at the moment are really smart city technologies, where they take a technology or type of technology or a sector of technologies, if you will, for a specific need and use that to excellence. So different cities do this differently based on their different needs. I think Amsterdam is a great example, for example, for smart mobility and transportation. London is one of the most CCTV covered cities in the world. So I suppose you would call it a leader in security. India is a global leader in smart waste management because that's the key need that the country has. And of course, there's some examples where you have countries and cities that have multiple sectors and use cases. I think Singapore is always the best example. That's always given for multi-sectorial use cases of smart city technologies. But how do you think this is going to go forward? Do you foresee different groups of cities moving along these lines and continue to improve and excelling in their areas and then essentially sharing that knowledge with other cities who use it and implement it? Does this mean that, for example, Amsterdam should teach everyone else on transportation and London should teach everyone else on security? And we should have this sort of global cross collaboration of different key metropolitan leaders, or is there a different model for this?
I thought London already had taught everyone about CCTV cameras. I can't go anywhere. About Amsterdam and mobility is a bit odd because actually the systems they got, which are fantastic, by the way, are integrated systems. And it's because there are lots and all the other elements around that, parking problems and so on. So it's an interesting idea, though. But yeah, overall, my start point for all of this is the human. A city, I don't care if it's smart or not smart, but any city ultimately is for us. And it's for our well-being. And if it's not for our well-being and progress, then there's something wrong with it.
Right.
Okay. Now, that's driven predominantly by two things. One, what is the city per se? That's made up of all the stakeholders in the city. What do they think, first of all, is the spirit, the soul of the city? What do they think it actually is? So, and this is a big start point for any, whether it's a big current city or a new city. And what's its essence? What's its functionality? And somewhere like Austin, which the perfect city, it wasn't, it became Silicon Hills. You can't afford to live there anymore. It was perfect in that way because it had an essence that I suppose you could say was keep Austin weird. There was a story like which is remote. And you could build around that by going weird in all different areas. So I worked on this. So I was a member of the original 2020 committee for Austin. I'm also part of the cultural division of the government to move forward. And so what we looked at was exactly that. So we wanted to keep Austin weird in some way or other. How do we do that? So we were lucky we took tech arts, okay, because they're really strong in the film, the music and everything else, and we were strong in tech. And we were able to say, how do we do this? So what part of the way of doing it is you have to get investment, and you always have to get investment of the headquarters. No point in having Motorola, a little Motorola factory, because you get nothing out of employing a few people, because the money's always go back to the headquarters. So you have to make this really somehow have a spirit that fits the city. There's some essential baseline already there if it's an existing city, and that enables growth, economic growth, and that enables the people of the city to feel a sense of belongingness and a buy-in to whatever that spirit or soul is. If you don't have that, you can just add bits on like every city has been doing, not very successfully. That's why we don't really get very integrated smart cities. But some of the ones you're mentioning, actually, in a way, they're not fully integrated smart cities, but they have elements on. But when you talk about a real smart city, you've got to start with what you're trying to achieve with that city, right? And then you start to talk about, this is a problem for me. And you look at analogies and you go, it's a computer city. It's a software city. It's all these weird names for how it's structured, what those really mean, and the structure of the city. What do we want? We want a tech city, a culture city, what city? Do we want a financial city? What do we want? And we have to sort of work out how we fit that in. And that is a predeterminant to what smartness means. Because if I want to be Atlanta and I want to be the second largest financial hub in the whole of the United States, which means I'm not just fighting with New York, but I'm fighting with LA and Dallas, and wherever. And therefore, I've got to have certain conditions that make that happen. So my smartness, which the average person may not know, is in all the technology that drives the financial sector. And you're going to say, well, it's not a very smart city. You still do all the same. Mobility is exactly the same as it was. But it's highly smart and it has the smartest people in finance working in it. And this is what's happening with cities, because we haven't really seen, well, maybe in China because they're building new cities, but in most places we don't really have that many new cities. If you look in UAE with the new city, Muscat, for example, it's not very exciting. Why? Because I have no idea what it's supposed to be. So there's nothing I can hang my hat on to even say where it's smart. I can say there's little bits of it that are smart, they're clever, but not honest, not very smart. And so I think there is this value, as you pointed out at the beginning, to having sections that are smart to build from. Okay? Now, you live in a city that actually isn't particularly smart, but what it is it has a really clear spirit. So when it begins to build its smartness, which would be around communications and so on and so forth, it'll be really smart, right? Because IoT and things like that, which are the key areas, some of the key areas, and though, situated awareness, right? In a city like Dubai, that's perfect because that city is perceived already as an intercommunicational city. The buildings are all tied between themselves, the way the cities are structured. What are they called? Sports city, video city, media city, I don't know, whatever the names they are, right? So there's a sort of like if you were drawing it, you'd have a hub, wouldn't you? And have all these, well, I'm sure they did, put all these bits around it. And you can see this like the perfect setup for a smart communications hub, which brings me back to something I talked about earlier, which was this issue of social cultural optimization. So what I think Dubai has done, even though it probably didn't call it that, has actually found a system that's moving towards social cultural optimization. And it's made the human, in many ways, pretty centered to that. But it's done something that makes the human, so when I say puts the human at the center can mean many things. It can mean convenience, ease of movement, and all the things it can mean, feeling safe, a sense of luxury, a sense of belongingness, all those things. But that sense of belongingness can come from not just the facilities, but that social cultural optimization. So I can say, I can't even understand why you're going to build the next biggest building in the world. What's it mean? But it means everything, okay? It means everything when you create a city that the soul of the city is that we are, or we're going to be, the world's best at everything. That gives you an incredible sense of belongingness. It's intrinsic. And people start saying, like they do in Austin, oh, they've been the best city on the planet because it's diverse, it's friendly, it's app friendly, it's ease of movement. We now have urban density, which we didn't have before. I mean, it's fantastic. We have everything. And we have fun because we have music and film and everything else. What more can a human being want? I feel it. I'm allowed to feel weird and different. That's my sense of belongingness, right? I think the problem with most cities is they haven't been able to achieve that. And that's why even if they are smart in certain ways, you've picked up on mobility because there are things we talk about. But, I said Atlanta because I think Atlanta is an incredibly smart city, like relatively, but it wouldn't be on anyone's list because no one's analyzing what the smartness is. They're waiting for the autonomous cars. We've made that ourselves. If it doesn't have autonomous cars, then it's not a smart city. If there are no robots greeting us, it's not a smart city, right? But believe me, having the best medical system in the world that's incredibly smart would be a pretty good first take for me as to what a smart city is. And what's happened is we're looking at the sort of icing without actually looking at the cake. That's part of the issue in discussing a smart city. It's like,
That's so true. That's a really apt analogy, I think. Yeah.
so where do you want to put your investment? Do I want to put it in something that's going to make it look nice? Or do I literally want to have the best medical system in the world that's actually saving lives? Now we're talking about human centric. So we have to think of these things really differently, and we have to think of them in the relationship to the place. Now that's different if you're building something new, fully new, which I'm doing in China or somewhere. But the ones that I've seen are lacking all that first bit. And that's why no one wants to move there.
That makes perfect sense. I think you can have the most flashy technologies, but without a soul behind cities, the body doesn't really work, does it?
No,
Yeah.
it doesn't. I don't think of the smartest thing that London ever did was stop cars driving into the centre. But it was hell. No, it's not.
Still not great, but it's getting better.
Yeah, but you know what I mean? It's like, maybe because we've overused the word, maybe the intelligence part of it has got lost somewhere.
I think so, because smart cities is such a subjective thing. Maybe we should have actually defined that as well, to some degree at least. But it's true because people can think of it as very different things. I've had discussions where people consider it to be more about sustainability and how it improves the environment and our overall living. But I think you're certainly right that you need to keep the user journey at the heart, at the core of any aspect of what we consider to be smart cities.
What's the most critical thing of a city? Livability, right? Why do you move to, well, we move to a city because of a job maybe, but still going to be livable.
I think London's a great example of this because so many people work in central London, but actually live in Strawberry Hill or Kingston or Richmond or wherever else in the boroughs of London, because I suppose they don't want to live in central.
No, because the livability is pretty poor. Sociability is really good.
Yeah.
So livability basically is about agency, growth opportunities, contribution. Am I contributing? What else? Choice, freedom of choice of how I live, and health and wellness and safety. But that was always to me a massive plus. I live in Rijeka. It's one of the safest places on the planet. You know how nice it is just to walk around, not think about being mugged.
Okay, that's fair. I think you want to continuously step on the technology today. I think it's almost a theme for this episode. But no, I agree with the premise. I think we almost get lost in how flashy and sexy a technology is. But it's really about what are you going to do with it? It's about how are we going to leverage this to improve something, improve our lives and processes that we currently have.
Don't misunderstand me. I love technology. I'm not.
So on that note, I think this brings to my mind another important question, which is accessibility of technology. We talked about AI and smart cities and all these things, but some cities don't even have basic fundamentals like clean running water and accessible roads, right? We can call this developing in developed nations, the global north and south, whatever the political terminology might be. But when you look at the gap, the divide technologically, it's very prevalent and very obvious. And it's always been the case that the most affluent and the most fortunate people are the first to use these technologies. And the most affluent and the most prosperous cities are the first to be able to implement them as well. There's some argument, of course, to be made that, especially when it comes to new technologies like solar panels and desalination, the cost of installing them and the knowledge required for enabling their implementation has dropped significantly. So maybe it costs one tenth of what it did at its inception to install solar panels now. But I would argue that's for current technologies. And we don't know what the future technologies like AI and smart cities are going to do. If anything, they're going to at least initially further that divide, further that gap before things come together. Overall, what are your thoughts on this when you're talking about technological advancement, moving cities from where they are now to the future, whatever it is?
Well, it's not always about the technology. It's about the investment costs of that technology. It's about the other aspects of it. What's the infrastructure that has to fit into? If you have no existing infrastructure, the costs of. But on the other hand, this is a perfect example of AI.
Is that an iPhone or a Samsung? That's my first question.
It's iPhone.
So I disagree with your premise altogether.
No, well, I mean, I didn't mean it from that perspective. But the phone, mobile device, but everybody has one.
Everybody maybe has a mobile communication device,
Yeah,
but they
mobile communication device.
but they don't have an iPhone, for example, right? This device that has massive computing power compared to what old computers used to do, right? A smartphone like an Android, Samsung, iPhone, whatever, can do much more than an old school flip phone could, right?
They're very cool at the moment. Be careful, they're trendy. Flip
An old school flip phone, right? Like the ones with the numbers on them and not the touch screen. Let's put it a different way. You can invest and buy the most advanced drone that has ever existed to do all your work that you want with it. If you don't have 5G or even 4G really, but if you don't have good telecommunication capabilities, this device is almost useless outside of a very small range. So you're limiting what it can actually do.
But you're asking me to resolve all the SDGs in one go.
Just as it relates to your field,
Just as it relates to
future,
poverty,
which is the
education,
future.
and everything else. Yeah.
Fix it, Derek. Fix it, would you?
Exactly. Exactly. Well, certain technologies are obviously been easier to migrate across different economic environments. And the mobile device, despite most things, it's a bit like the television. Of course, there are people without television, but the household devices, because of the number of them and the simplicity of, in a way, of them, the mechano-technical simplicity of a washing machine, which is why it only costs about $300 or something, has enabled them to be across all. And these are critical because these are for daily functional use technologies. Now, I agree with you. If you want to do something a little more, ultimately, let's take VR. It's a good example. We can all talk about VR, but most of us don't have a VR set, even though it's an everyday thing we talk about. So it's not that poorer people don't have it. No one has it. Obviously, a lot of the sort of lower level technologies, which didn't seem like they were at the time, like a washing machine or TV or whatever, with time have become so cheap that they're available in most places. I know, of course, there are places not, relatively speaking, they're available. And obviously, with time, this is a good thing. Yes, more and more people. I do meet more and more people, by the way, who do have phones I would never expect them to have. And that's to do with the way that credit systems work. That's to do with the way that promotions work within organizations. So none of this is necessarily just about the technology. This is about, again, the ecosystem in which that technology thrives or doesn't thrive. We still do not have VR systems in our homes. We know that you need to harmonize 3 or 4 of the steep things for it to happen, right? Because technology on its own it's great, but doesn't mean much if the price is completely off the, or it's too clunky or the law says you can't use it. So a lot of the time, there are a whole variety of reasons why there's inequality of distribution of technologies. And of course, one of them is economic development. As I mentioned earlier, we've actually done relatively well with smartphones. Why? Because in most countries now, this is something I've learned at least. Let's say I work a lot with Uganda, Rwanda, Kenya, is they buy a second-hand version of this. So they actually are not. So someone said to me, I just bought a new phone. And I said, oh, that's good. What did you buy? They said, an iPhone. I went, what? And I was thinking, how could you, as a student, how could you find an iPhone? I said, I paid $150. And I said, oh, that's cool. She said, yeah, well, I bought a second-hand one. So, there are a lot of systems. Then there are more credit systems than there used to be. What I'd call the household goods or consumer goods in general, we have very good structures to mollify or remedy that particular type of inequalities. Of course, we still have them, but they're far less than they could be. The problem is much more on real tech, right? On real non-consumer tech, where either there are reasons why we won't sell it, or there's no, as I mentioned earlier, no architecture for its introduction, which is very common, or there's no desire from the government of the day to introduce that at this point in time because it's either detrimental to their own authority or they have other general public desires that are greater than that. So a lot of reasons, and to be fair, accessibility is always going to be unbalanced, but it's changing a little bit because spread of development and patenting and invention has shifted. And that has allowed countries, even that are looking at offer a geopolitical advantage in certain regions, to be able to introduce technologies to that region because it gives them a different advantage. Maybe they don't need the political clout in that region based on politics or systems, but they can leverage technologies and investment in factories and so on to produce things, which is what China's been doing. And so there are other ways that we're seeing shifts because of globalization. We have seen shifts in this particular issue.
Okay. You brought up China. We touched on this a bit earlier as well. I think especially when we're talking about what AI can have access to. Security of these types of technologies is a key fundamental as well. I know it's an area you work on a lot in the human side of security, but when it comes especially to the machine side of things, when you're talking about what can be done, how moving forward with these types of technology and the access of information that we're essentially giving things like ChatGPT and HMI and BCI and even smart cities and IoT. The security becomes a fundamental metric. I know, again, that's a very broad area. We could do a full episode just on this. It's one of those things you can talk about each of these things, like smart cities and security, sort of a vacuum of the overall technological implementation, but they are in and of themselves a key factor. Yeah, what are your thoughts on this, especially when you're talking about things like, again, Neuralink, for example, that has access to potentially your innermost thoughts, coupled with the simple fact that we continuously hear all of these companies have data breaches and ransomware attacks.
Absolutely. Well, so the next wave, if you want to call it that, of security concerns, other than drones and stuff like that, or weaponry, around IoT, IoNT, OTT, all the stuff I was talking about. Distributed sensing, because of the way they're structured, because they are always made up of, as a metaverse is, 3 or 4 different interactive structures, integrated structures, like one for receiving the data, one for analyzing data, one for distributing the data. There's always that, and they're usually often not on the same platforms, and therefore there's always a chance of being hacked in between them. That's a big issue. Quantum IoT, which we're now beginning to see, is the same issue. Intelligent PSMI, which is another area where we're seeing, because each of these layers has security issues. And that's even just looking at it from a virtual physical part of it. We're looking at things like end-to-end security, federated architecture, stuff. But the other side of that, I think we have this thing called, we're seeing more like on stuff like penetration testing, where we're able to actually in advance do a lot of simulation scenarios of just better understand how we deal on new things, on new technologies, but on new environments for those technologies. Because we think we have a lot of experience with IoT, but not when we talk about connected buildings and stuff like that. We have it in household goods. And so one of the things we're looking at is what we call cognitive and rapid reconstruction response. so we can quickly see what's going on, so we can quickly react to it.
Right.
There are all these things like, I don't know, Watson and IBM have lots of good systems in that area that we've seen over the years. But biosecurity, another massive area. So you were talking earlier about identity and authentication and everything else. But biosecurity is a massive area of break-ins on. So these intelligent and embodied agents, more and more getting put into these systems, are enabling us, without doubt, to improve that security. But we're seeing issues with metadata analysis on the dark web. We're seeing problems with the new cryptography, post-quantum, which will move on from blockchain possibly, because that's a lattice-based system. And within that problem, the shifting of identities and shifting of IP addresses becomes very complex because it can move much quicker through the lattice. It's difficult to find, right? So we're having to work on how do we deal with this stuff? So we're seeing much more things like the equivalent of undercover agent. We now see virtual undercover agents and things like that, right? So we're seeing a lot of other things happening, which is this transformation from real life into virtuality, but done in a very different way. That's what we have to do to see how we can deal with these changes in security, because then we have things like cognitive cybersecurity systems, which are able to deal with textual things. So we can read text. We're much better now at scanning text to find keywords or key issues. All this stuff is happening really, really quickly. And at the same time, criminals are behaving badly, worse than they were. So there are the cloud, machine learning with multi-agents, all this stuff is doing a lot. Computer vision, all these things are coming in to help us. And the integration of those has been very good. But honestly, they're always a bit ahead, right? And it's difficult because what we do have with self-developing intelligent systems, GPT and so on and so forth, is we hope that they will be able to react quicker, if they're programmed correctly, by finding their own solutions to incoming issues. I can't go too much into this for obvious reasons. You can imagine
Of course.
that at least now we're not standing still. My personal belief was there was a period where we were miles behind. I think everyone was taken a bit by surprise. They shouldn't. The trouble is that serious institutions do not pay attention to things like gaming or other subgenre of society, which is where much of this comes from. They don't really pay attention to decentralized activities. If they did, they would soon understand.
What about the fundamental that AI, obviously, if it can be used for pretty much anything, especially as an assistant, if you will, it could be used to assist hackers.
Well, it is.
How do you compute for that?
Well, that's where you have to have early detection systems and things. Ultimately, you'd like to think always that you are cleverer. You're not. Maybe you're equally clever, but then it's a game, isn't it? It's a game. It's a game of strategies.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, the smartest hack is the one that uses people. You're only ever as strong as your weakest link, and you can just use the most basic social engineering and phishing techniques to get someone's password. Once you have access to their password, you have access to their network, and then that's game over, isn't it?
But if you think about it, who are you fighting today? You're not fighting an individual criminal. You're fighting a whole world of social networks with information on how to do anything that you want at any given point in time. It's not like if you want to know how to do something, you can look it up and learn how to do it. You want to, I won't say because I'd be giving away some ideas, but it's not very clever. Not very clever, right? But the truth is that you can learn to make anything on YouTube. You can get any code you want from certain hubs. You can, let's be fair, you're not actually, where the police is not or the authorities are not just fighting, you know, a guy with a brain and a basic tool set. He's fighting a whole structure,
Right.
plus new tools like GPT. That's the point. So, yeah, it's tough. It's tough. But that's part of our job, isn't it, to resolve that?
Let's end on a more positive note. I have two quick questions for you. We talked about futurism and becoming a futurist. What are some of the steps that an aspiring futurist could take to become a futurist? Is there a course someone should take? Is there any advice you have for them?
Said to you at the very beginning that what a futurist does, in my view, is to work with unstructured knowledge in unknown worlds. There's two sides to that. So, what is unstructured knowledge? How do you gain unstructured knowledge? It's about connecting disconnects. It's about getting rid of any assumption that you've ever had about anything. It's about the ability to recontextualize and reconceptualize ideas. Anything, anything. It's about being open to believing that much of this will happen in a different format maybe than the one that we read about or we expect or we projected, whatever it happens to be, but that the possibility is there. The unthinkable is valid. My personal view is that one thing that's really critical here is to develop and be able to do that is develop alternative thinking techniques, is have that ability to model and to think about things, the same thing from multiple perspectives, and to really cross-check yourself, continuously think about something from these multiple angles, because it teaches you not just to think in broader terms, but it teaches you to think of something else, to come up with something completely different to the thing that you actually started with. And I mentioned unknown worlds, and I say they're unknown because I literally believe that future in which I will still live, 25, 30 years, will be vastly different to the one that that I project, even though I'm working in that field all the time. And to embrace that, because recognizing that we change too, that we adapt. I'm going to go into the whole thing about adaptation because there are four types of people. Some are very good at adapting, some just refuse to do anything, others go with the flow. But let's just assume that ultimately people adapt. People who 20 years ago or 15 years ago did not have an internet or didn't have a computer, the great divide, if you remember, over computers at the time, use a computer today and use the internet. But the other factor, I think, is build a network, okay? Because over the years, 27 years, and if you don't take anything before that, I've managed to build an incredible network of experts. And I mentioned sci-fi buddies, but I could mention anyone for any, and I mentioned from neurology, but many fields. And the point is that when I want something, I more or less know where to go to challenge myself and to challenge my thinking and to check my thinking and myself. So I will go to someone like Brian Majerico at the Expressive Machinery Lab at Georgia Tech, and I'll talk to him about creative social interaction and I don't know, intelligent agents and how they're being developed and why they're being developed and stuff like that. Or if I want to talk about interfaces, I'll talk to Patty Mice at MIT and her lab. What projects are they working on? And she's working on things like programming brain rhythms, because that's important if we want to understand how people react within the metaverse in 3D worlds and stuff like that. So I know these people in key places that I can check myself, my own thinking, but get new thinking. And I think that's really critical for futurists Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we read so much and we have our own thoughts and we build so much and we do a lot of things. And we're obviously attempting to be ahead of the game and create new things for the future and whatever, but it's not something you can do alone. It's something you need your own team, but you need this network is really your team. You want to talk about transhumanism, you go to a transhumanist specialist, you go to Natasha Vita-Moore or something and talk to them about it. And I think that's been a critical part of that. The other thing is, I'm talking about writing. I do think writing is important, getting your stuff down or doing lots of presentations, because it makes you put all this into context. It makes you really rethink it, which is, doesn't make any sense, is it? And so I think structuring your thinking, writing, and whether it's papers or books or whatever, is really helpful.
Anything else you want to add? Anything else that you think our listeners should keep an eye for?
I am writing another book. I'm writing a book called, I suppose it's a follow-up, a decade long in between. So there was nearly a decade between future frequencies and future flow. Now there's a decade, now the new one's called future rhythms, but it's sort of the same type of thing. It's really talking about how you leverage these alternative worlds, these alternative people, alternative lifestyles to get a better understanding of how those can influence the future and influence things that we don't normally look at. I like to study lifestyles and art and music and films and things that are outside of the norm to really work out how these can influence the future. So that's what it's, and that should be done this year. So
Wonderful. We'll certainly keep an eye out for that. I'd like to thank you so much for your time. It was a phenomenal conversation. I think we covered so many different topics from different sectors. I think that just goes to show the plethora of expertise that you actually possess. So thank you so much for your time.
thank you.